She said she loved me, then looked up from the wedding checklist and told me that if we ever had kids, she'd rather they inherit her ex's genes because he was more attractive. It wasn't framed as an insult. She delivered it like a cost-saving measure, like switching caterers or trimming the guest list. I stared at her for a second, let the silence stretch, and then said the only thing that matched her tone. Sounds logical. The next day, while she was at her final dress fitting with her mother and bridesmaids, I canceled the wedding, closed every account she could touch, and walked away. When she called in a panic, I told her to go have beautiful children with someone else. I'm 30 now, but this happened last year when I was 29 and convinced I'd finally built the life that would make love easy. My ex-fiancée, Raina, was the kind of woman people noticed before she even spoke. She didn't just look good, she looked curated, like every angle had been audited. I was the opposite. Not ugly, not remarkable. 5'9", glasses, hair thinning early, the kind of face you forget unless I'm the one fixing your problem. I'd learned to compete with effort. I trained 4 days a week, wore decent clothes, kept myself in shape, and built my value in the place that never lied. Work. I started a small software consultancy after a miserable corporate stretch, took contracts no one else wanted, and slowly turned chaos into cash. By my late 20s, my house was paid off, my business was stable, and my life was simple. I thought that kind of foundation was rare. I thought it would be appreciated. Raina did appreciate it, but not the way I assumed. She loved what stability looked like from the outside. She loved the kitchen island, the clean driveway, the ability to post from an airport lounge without worrying about rent. Looking back, the romance always felt like a performance with a budget. She was the aesthetic. I was the supply chain. The red flags weren't dramatic. They were beige. The house slowly lost color because neutral tones photographed better. The living room became a showroom instead of a place to sit. She'd rearrange pillows before guests arrived, but also before we watched a movie because the frame needed to look right even if no one was filming. Her coffee wasn't coffee until the foam had the right pattern. Nothing could just be. Everything had to be optimized. She treated life like a brand audit, and I treated her obsession like a quirk, because love makes you generous with explanations. Then there was her ex, Ashton. Ashton was a personal trainer with a body that looked engineered. Tall, broad-shouldered, perfect hair, perfect teeth, the kind of guy who never has to prove he belongs in a room. He was also 30, lived with roommates, and bounced between short-term schemes. Raina would call him driven. I'd call him allergic to responsibility. Early in our relationship, he popped up in little ways. A text asking for advice, a late-night call about money, a vague emergency that always ended with a transfer. Raina once asked if I could help her cover a loan he hadn't repaid. I did it because I didn't want him hanging around our life like unpaid interest. I told myself it was the cost of peace. After that, she still brought him up in strange contexts. We'd be watching a movie, and she'd comment on an actor's shoulders or jaw and say it reminded her of Ashton. She'd talk about height like it was a credential. She'd say people with symmetry get treated differently, as if attraction were an economy and she'd found a cheat code. I laughed it off because I didn't want to be the jealous guy. We were weeks from the wedding, and I thought the past was the past. 4 weeks out, I'd already paid around $60,000 in deposits. Not because I needed an expensive wedding, but because she wanted a wedding that looked expensive. Venue, catering, band, photographer, florist, a custom bar setup, all top shelf because she said the day had to feel like a once-in-a-lifetime production. I signed checks and told myself I was investing in our beginning. Then the conversation happened, the one that ripped the mask off. It was a Tuesday. Nothing dramatic. Just dinner at the island, plates half finished, her tablet open on a board labeled Future Family. Every photo looked like a catalog. Kids in linen outfits, soft light, perfect teeth. She tapped her stylus like she was about to present quarterly numbers. She said we needed to revisit the timeline for kids. I said we'd talked about a year after the wedding. She nodded but kept going, saying she'd been thinking about variables. Then she looked at me with a serious expression that felt like pity. She told me I was a great partner, stable, smart, kind. I joked that I heard a pivot coming. She corrected me and said, not a pivot, a plan. She explained that the world was shallow and that pretty privilege and height privilege were real. I didn't disagree. I just didn't know where she was going. Then she said that logically, if we wanted to give our children the best advantage, we shouldn't use my genetics. My brain refused to process it for a second, like language had glitched. I asked if she meant adoption. She said no, she wanted to carry the baby. She just wanted a donor with elite traits. And then she said Ashton's name as casually as if she were suggesting we order Thai food. She said he was 6'4", had perfect vision, no family history of heart issues, and a full head of hair. She said his bone structure was ideal. She said that if we combined her genes with his, we'd practically guarantee a child with physical superiority. She used the word advantage like she was talking about scholarships. She said I'd be the father in every way that mattered. The one on the birth certificate, the one raising the kid, teaching values, providing stability. She said the child would have my intelligence because I would shape the mind, but Ashton would provide the chassis. She said it was the best of both worlds. I asked if she was actually telling me she wanted me to raise her ex's child. She insisted it would be our child, just with better inputs. Then she gestured at me like I was an item on a list. Glasses, under 6 feet, mild asthma. Why pass that on when we had a premium option? She said it was selfish to burden a child with average traits when optimization was possible. And then she casually added that she'd already talked to Ashton and he was on board, as a donor only, no involvement, just biology. That was the moment the love didn't fade. It snapped. Not because she said I wasn't perfect, but because she had already negotiated my replacement behind my back and expected gratitude for the proposal. I saw my role clearly. The provider, the safety net, the man who paid for the family but didn't belong in the bloodline. I realized that if I shouted, she'd call me insecure. If I argued, she'd call me emotional. If I begged, she'd call it fragile ego. So I spoke her language. I picked up my glass, took a slow sip, and told her she made a compelling case. I said we shouldn't let my ego get in the way of the product. Her face lit up. She looked proud of me. She said most men would be toxic about it and that this was why she loved me, because I could be rational. I told her I'd sleep on the logistics and we'd finalize tomorrow. She smiled and said her final fitting was in the morning and then we could celebrate. I kissed her forehead, cleaned the kitchen, and told her I had work to finish. She went to bed happy, probably imagining a designer baby with Ashton's height and her jawline. I went to my office and opened my banking apps. I didn't sleep. I reorganized my life like a hostile takeover. First, the joint account. We both contributed, but I put in most of the money. I transferred my share back to my primary account and left a small amount that matched what she'd actually deposited. Second, the cards. She was an authorized user on 2 of mine. I removed her entirely. Not froze, removed. Third, the vendors. That was painful. Deposits were non-refundable. I accepted it. I'd rather burn that money than spend another dollar funding a woman who planned a family where I was optional. I wrote a single short email and sent it to every vendor. Wedding canceled effective immediately. Deposits understood. Do not contact the bride. Direct everything to me. It was just after 3 a.m. Then I handled the house. I bought it before we met. Her name wasn't on it, but she lived there. I couldn't legally throw her out overnight, but I could protect myself. I removed her codes from the smart lock, changed the garage keypad, and disabled her app access. I packed 2 suitcases, booked a hotel suite for a week, and planned my exit so I wouldn't be present for the explosion. At 8, she woke up cheerful. I made coffee like nothing happened. That was the hardest part. She told me she was glad I understood the donor plan and said it proved how secure I was. Then she showed me a message from Ashton. He joked about donating, called it wild, said he was down if I was cool. I stared at the screen and felt nothing but clarity. She asked if I'd pay the remaining balance on her dress that day. She said she'd just put it on my card. I nodded and told her she deserved a great fitting. I kissed her forehead and watched her drive away. Once her car turned the corner, I walked out with my suitcases and locked the door behind me. In my hotel room, I watched my phone like a timer. I knew the exact rhythm of that appointment. Trying on, adjustments, tears, champagne, and then the payment at the end. A little after 10:50, the notification started. Card declined. Attempted charge a little over $4,000 at the bridal boutique. Another decline. Then her call. I let it ring a few times and answered calmly. She sounded panicked, whisper shouting, embarrassed by the people around her. She asked what was wrong with the card. She asked if it was fraud protection. I told her I canceled it and removed her access. There was silence, the kind that happens when someone's reality collapses in public. She demanded why today, why now, why would I do this on the biggest day? I told her I also canceled the venue, the catering, and the band. The wedding was off. She asked if it was a joke. Her voice cracked. She said everyone was staring. I told her I was being logical. I crunched the numbers. If my genetics weren't good enough to be the father of her children, then logically I wasn't good enough to be the husband who funded her life. I said it would be a terrible investment to bankroll a family line that intentionally excluded me. She tried to backpedal, saying she didn't mean I wasn't good enough, saying she just wanted to optimize. I told her she loved my wallet and my stability, but respected Ashton's biology more than mine. I told her she had already talked to him before talking to me, and that wasn't optimization. It was betrayal with extra steps. She started sobbing. She said she was in the dress. She begged me not to do this. I told her to take the dress off. She couldn't afford it. Maybe Ashton could cover it with all that superior currency. I told her the house was locked and I'd send a time next week when she could retrieve her things. I told her not to contact me again. Then I hung up and blocked her number. I expected heartbreak. What I felt was lightness. In the following days, I blocked her family and friends too, because I knew the flying monkeys were coming. I worked from the hotel, and it was absurd how productive I became when my evenings weren't spent debating napkin shades. On the fourth day, a mutual friend warned me she was posting online, claiming I abandoned her because I was insecure about her past. She didn't mention the donor plan. She painted me as controlling and cruel. I didn't rant. I didn't call her names. I responded once, clearly. I explained that she proposed using her ex as a donor because she wanted to optimize for height and looks, and that she had already discussed it with him. I said I refused to fund a future where I was a spectator in my own family. Then I turned my phone off and went to the gym. When I checked later, the noise was enormous, but I didn't read much of it. I wanted closure, not a crowd. 2 weeks later, we scheduled a time for her to retrieve her belongings. I hired a security guard and arranged for a locksmith to change the locks after she left. I wanted a witness and a boundary, not a fight. She arrived in a rented truck with her father. She looked exhausted, stripped of the polished aesthetic, hair in a messy bun, face tired, eyes swollen. Her father avoided my eyes, embarrassed in a quiet, heavy way. My security guard handled the check-in like it was a formal appointment and kept the tone flat and professional. I had boxed her things in advance and stacked them in the garage. She tried to talk. She asked for 5 minutes without the guard. I told her the guard stayed and there was nothing to discuss. She said she'd lost friends, that Ashton blocked her, that she was back in her parents' house. I told her that sounded difficult. She said she missed me and missed the house and insisted she had been scared and said something stupid. She claimed she didn't really care about looks or height. She just panicked. I stepped back when she reached for my arm. I told her it wasn't panic. It was arrogance. I told her she believed she could curate a life where I paid the bills and Ashton provided the biology, and that she wanted the aesthetic of a family without respecting the husband. She cried and begged for a chance to fix it. I told her I had considered her logic and that character mattered more than symmetry. I said if we had children, there was a serious chance they'd inherit her entitlement, her disloyalty, her inability to grasp consequences. I told her I couldn't risk building a life on that foundation. I said I needed to optimize for integrity, and she didn't meet the criteria. Her father called her from the driveway, voice heavy, telling her they needed to finish loading. She stood for a few seconds waiting for me to crack, waiting for the version of me who used to smooth everything over. That version died at the kitchen island. My security guard checked his watch and told her time was up. She left sobbing. The truck pulled away. The locksmith arrived minutes later. After the locks changed, the house felt like mine again for the first time in months. I spent the next several weeks rebuilding routines without apology. I cleaned out the closet space, rearranged rooms for comfort instead of photographs, and put color back on the walls. I rebuilt friendships that had been pushed aside by wedding chaos and constant social events. I learned who valued truth over convenience and who preferred a dramatic story over reality. I also learned how quietly a person can lose self-respect by trying to prove they deserve a place they already earned. The hardest part wasn't losing the wedding. It was accepting that I had been loved for what I provided, not for who I was. Months later, a mutual acquaintance told me she was dating another guy from her gym. Tall, model handsome, exactly her type. Not Ashton. Ashton wanted nothing to do with her. The new guy was broke and she was paying for everything, driving him around, working extra shifts to cover rent. I didn't gloat. I just nodded because it fit the pattern. She valued the shell, then paid the price for ignoring the substance. As for me, I started seeing someone who didn't treat life like a brand strategy. Her name was Elise, a pediatrician with a busy schedule and a steady sense of humor. One night we cooked dinner and she looked at me and said I had kind eyes and hoped our future kids got them. I mentioned they might need glasses. She shrugged and said smart people often do, and kissed me like it was a compliment, not a defect. That was when I understood the real difference. In one relationship, my value was conditional on what I could fund and how well I tolerated being compared. In the other, my value was simply me. Walking away wasn't revenge, it was preservation. I kept the deposits as a private lesson I didn't need to repeat. I stopped confusing calm behavior with character, and I stopped rewarding entitlement with access. Over time, the anger shrank into a clear boundary. Never again. When I think back to that kitchen island, I don't remember the insult as much as the certainty that arrived afterward. It wasn't just that she wanted someone else's genes. It was that she believed I should pay for the privilege of being replaced. That idea died, and with it, the version of me who apologized for not being tall enough.